Minnesota, Florida, two states in the same great nation, but they seem worlds apart when it comes to so-called gender-affirming care for kids. A Florida pediatrician talks about some of the not-so-obvious reasons and why it's important to put fear aside and push back. Next. Dr. Patrick Hunter is a pediatrician and member of the Florida Board of Medicine, the first and only board in the U.S. to have a policy that opposes youth transition and gender care for kids. But Dr. Hunter, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I need to state that anything I say is I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the Florida Board of Medicine, nor am I speaking for the state of Florida. I'm speaking as a concerned pediatrician and father.
Which we appreciate so much. You reached out after seeing a previous episode, Doctor, about all of this, but transgender transitions as so-called care for children. As a pediatrician, your experience, I know, dates back decades. When did gender issues first show up on your radar? And I think more importantly, why have you relentlessly pushed back against this so-called gender-affirming care, these policies and procedures for children?
A decade ago, in 2015, I started seeing children in my office who were identifying as the opposite sex. Previous decade, or 2 decades, 23 years, I had never seen a child tell me they were the opposite sex. This was something new. I had gay patients in my practice, lesbians in my practice. I knew that. I knew there were transsexuals, transvestites. This was the old, now outdated term, but I had never seen a child. I knew of adults, but I had never seen a child. So this was brand new. And since then, the rest of the world has seen this.
Why has this been so important for you to take on?
Because it's a lie. Because I've vowed to help children, and this is harming children. I've seen way too many children harmed by this ideology, children and young adults. And it's not evidence-based, it's not science-based, it's not rational.
Minnesota is still reeling from the horrific shooting at Annunciation Church and School. We know Robert, or after his name change, Robin Westman, was responsible. We spoke briefly before, Doctor, about Westman and the circumstances, and you said he was never a girl and he was lied to. And in a way, you almost seem to have predicted tragedies like this years ago. Tell us more about that.
Like I said, I know many children, young adults, even older adults who have been harmed by this ideology. Sadly, I personally know hundreds, and I've gotten to know them quite well through the years. Had some of them to my home, met with my children and my family. These children and young adults have been harmed terribly by this ideology. At the beginning, when they start to detransition, they've been psychologically and physically harmed. The physical harm can never be healed. The changes that hormones do to the body, the changes that surgery do, obviously, are irreversible. If you have a breast cut off, it cannot be reattached. If you have your genitalia cut off, it cannot be reattached. The psychological harms are also terribly harmful. I've seen kids through the years heal, get better. They're never going to fully recover. Like I said, they have been lied to by the medical profession. And that anger, which is the initial feeling I think they rightly feel, that anger mixed with the psychological harm, and many of these youth also have psychological problems. My fear has been that the anger, the harm done to them, the underlying psychological problems may end up in violence. I never imagined it would be what we saw in Minneapolis, but Minneapolis is not the first one. We saw this in Nashville. And what we're seeing is evil. It's evil. And I'm not excusing it, but I'm laying part of the blame at the medical profession, the harm that is being done to these youth.
So there's the person, doctor, but there's also the place. What is it about Minnesota? Why do you think this tragedy happened here? There seems to be plenty of answers, with transgender issues becoming pervasive throughout our public schools here. The Minnesota media celebrating transgenderism, least of all with news about a biological male being crowned Minnesota's Woman of the Year. We have our lieutenant governor telling us we must believe what kids say, wearing a t-shirt that said "Protect Trans Kids" with a large knife on it. Beyond the obvious, though, you mentioned that much of it can be traced back to a specific person in one specific place here in Minnesota.
I can't speak to specifics about Minnesota, and I don't want to speak to politics, because this is about children and youth. But there is one person in Minnesota, Eli Coleman, and he is the former president of the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. And he is the first author, or the senior author, on WPATH's standards of care. And he has been dishonest. WPATH has been dishonest. They commissioned Johns Hopkins University to do systematic evidence reviews, to look at the evidence. And they found, quote, Johns Hopkins found there is little to no evidence to support this in youth and children. WPATH, led by Eli Coleman, suppressed this information from the public. They prevented Johns Hopkins from publishing this. Johns Hopkins wanted to publish it, and WPATH would not let them.
I know in speaking up about kids and transgenderism, you've taken on the American Academy of Pediatrics, another large organization, in fact, the largest professional association of pediatrics in the country. The same organization that you say actually removed detransitioners from its conferences. Is that true?
In 2023, I attended their national conference in Washington, D.C., a group of concerned physicians, and I think we had 5 detransitioners, and we attended for 4 days. And they let us stay. We were not welcome. We had 3 or 4 pediatricians yell at the detransitioners, frankly make them cry. But I was heartened that the vast majority of physicians came up to us and told us they supported us. They whispered in our ear, please, we thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. The vast majority of pediatricians knew something was wrong, but we've all been silenced. Last year, 2024, I did not attend, but another group of physicians and courageous detransitioners did attend. And AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, called security and had them removed and escorted out of the vendor hall. They had paid money to have a vendor table to educate people, just as the drug companies educate people, the formula manufacturers educate people. But this education is not permitted per AAP.
Along with the censorship, you're talking about this fear and intimidation. We've seen that here, even just trying to do some of this reporting in the wake of this story. Last week, for example, Vice President J.D. Vance visited the survivors of the shooting in Minneapolis. You can see people are flipping him off. You hear some of the awful things. They're shouting at the vice president's motorcade. And then we have things like this, another local issue, a message on social media. This is from the Socialist Rifle Association. It says, you gotta train if you want to bash back. Join the Socialist Rifle Association. Defend equality is written on the trans flag. But aside from the disrespect, the intimidation, and the outright threats, it doesn't seem like they're just talking about pediatric care here. And do you think that this is effective? It keeps people quiet.
The medical profession. We can't sit down at medical meetings and have rational discussions about this. That is wrong. And then we're seeing this bleed out into the larger community, and it's terrible. It's terrible, the threats. And the threats are designed, I suspect, to silence people with concern. Just as WPATH silenced Johns Hopkins, the AAP has silenced detransitioners and silenced concerned members, and you're seeing that silence being forced upon the public.
And you do see that as you've brought the receipts here, Doctor, that they are trying to paint this in a political light. You can even see Eli Coleman say that conservative winds are strong right now as he's trying to map out this strategy to go ahead and cling on to this care. But that's what they're almost turning this into. And I know you're coming at this from a different angle.
This is not a political issue. For the activist clinicians, yes, it may be political for them. And there is evidence going back as early as the 1970s that this was about politics. This is not a right-left issue. This is a right or wrong issue. And I think, thankfully, the tides are turning and the public is seeing that this is wrong. And this needs to stop. This needs to end.
At the federal level, President Trump seems to be taking a much different approach than the previous administration. But politics aside, what will it take for people to understand how this so-called care for children isn't actually care at all? And where can people go for more information?
I wish I knew what would change the tides completely. There's a lot of work ahead. There's been a lot of work in the last 3 years, and I think the public is seeing. What is it going to take? It's going to take parents to stand up to schools, where schools are pushing this. It's going to take parents to stand up to physicians who push this. I would go to SEGM's website, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. That's geared towards physicians. It's geared towards clinicians and researchers. But I think parents can learn a lot there.
Dr. Patrick Hunter, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
That will do it for this episode of Liz Collin Reports. We will see you next time.